Hi guys, the purpose of this video is to go through some rationale examples, some that are fantastic and some that require a little bit of work to give you an idea about what's expected in your rationale. So rationale basically sets the scene for the research task. It breaks down the claim into a specific research question, but also supplies some kind of context which gives a suggestion that this is an important claim or research question to investigate. So this student was a Year 12 student who wanted to investigate the claim that synthetic fibres are better than natural fibres. You can see that she has started nicely introducing the claim in a context, not just saying the claim is. So in a recent article published by EcoWorld, it was stated that we are surrounded by synthetic fibres in modern day life. They are used everywhere in our homes, in our clothing, in bedding, and even office and commercial environment. Thus, it is possible to claim the statement that. Okay, so she's put the claim into a specific context by supplying a little bit of background information there. Then she's gone on to define the key terms. So obviously the claim is synthetic fibres are better than natural fibres. So key terms there would be synthetic fibres, natural fibres, and the word better, which is very vague. Synthetic fibres she's defined, natural fibres she's defined, and then she's said better is defined as desirable, satisfactory, or effective, which of course is not measurable, so we need to narrow that down. In the next part, she's given a little bit of background information, but it's not terribly clear. She is attempting to narrow down that term better into some kind of measurable property. She's referred to tensile strength, which is also given a context in which tensile strength might be important, which is electrical and thermal insulation use. Then towards the end there, she's narrowed down synthetic and natural fibres to e-glass and cotton with a little bit of justification. So you'll see she's written e-glass and cotton were eventually selected as both were used for electrical and thermal insulation, and tensile strength is important for that. So that's not the best narrowing down to the specifics of the research task, but there is an attempt to do that there. Then the next important thing she's done is she's supplied some chemical background information which is required to understand the report and also to understand the scientific arguments that she wishes to develop in a report. So she's given a lovely diagram there of what e-glass is and described the bonding that occurs which is responsible for the tensile strength which she's going to talk about. She's also done the same thing for cotton, which was the other fibre that she was going to look at. She's finished her rationale with a scientific explanation or an argument for the trends that she expects to see in the data that she collects. All right, so she's written, when compared with e-glass, it can be assumed that cotton has significantly higher tensile strength. Hopefully her data is going to show that. And then she's gone on to say that this is due to the crystalline structure and strong hydrogen bonds that hold the fibre together. Don't worry about the context of this. Like, you're not expected to understand this chemistry. She's done a lot of research and reading to be able to understand that particular chemistry, and you will do the same. It's important to keep in mind that by the time she writes the entire rationale, she has found the data that backs up her argument. She knows what the trends are that will be observed. You don't write a rationale before you've found the data and analysed it. So it sounds very complicated and very scientific, but she's done a lot of work before she can actually write this rationale. Looking at her research question, does e-glass fibre or cotton fibre have higher tensile strength with reference to being effective thermal insulators? You can see that the question is specific, so she's narrowed down the broad terms of natural and synthetic fibres to two specific fibres, e-glass and cotton. And one particular property that she's looking at, tensile strength, which she will use to determine whether it's better in the context that she's given, which is thermal insulating. It's a relevant research question because it relates to the claim specifically, but also fits into Unit 4 of chemistry, which is when she wrote this assignment. Okay, we have another one that also is answering the same claim, which is synthetic fibres are better than natural fibres. Once again, she's set the scene before she says what the claim is. She's narrowed down the broad terms synthetic fibre down to polyester and given some justification and some background information about polyester when she's narrowed it down, which is a slightly different structure to the one above, but just as effective, probably more effective in fact. Then she's narrowed down the broad term natural fibre down to cotton, given some background information on cotton in terms of structure and bonding, and then she's narrowed down the term better quite effectively, more effectively than the previous example. She's also outlined the possible properties that may be investigated. So when discussing what is better fibre in clothing manufacturing, so there's your context, factors such as cost, and she's given a lot of properties that need to be considered, talked about some of the ones that she thought she might do, and then came upon tear resistance because she figured that was a more relevant thing for clothing manufacturing. Then she's giving the background information to the scientific argument that she's going to develop in her analysis of her results. Okay, so that was a really good rationale. Now we come to a grade 10 rationale, which was modified metals are better than pure metals. You'll see this student, this starts with, the claim of this investigation states, this is not a nice smooth introduction to the topic. So try and set the scene a bit rather than just go, the claim states. She's then gone on to define the key terms quite well, and she's given a little bit of background information to narrow down the term better and understand some of the trends that might be seen. Right, so she's talked about how better is very vague. We want a specific variables. There's a lot of properties she could have chosen from, and she's listed them all. And then she said something about the bonding in metals, which is responsible for the high tensile strength. All right, so there's an attempt there to talk about the scientific arguments, but it's not really very clear. But there's a definite attempt to talk about relevant chemistry that she might draw on in her analysis. Then she goes on to try to justify why she chose ultimate tensile strength and elongation as her properties and sheet metal work as her context. There's elements of what needs to be there, but it's not well formulated, but it's reasonable. So she probably got a reasonable rationale for her mark for this part. Here we've got a little bit of another attempt to justify or explain the trends that she may have seen, but it's flawed. She's actually a little bit back to front. So she's attempted a scientific argument, but it's flawed. But it's better than not even attempting a scientific argument, because obviously you won't get anything for that section of her marking criteria. So this was a reasonable rationale here, not a considered rationale. So the two above were considered. They weren't perfect, but they were considered rationales. And this one was just reasonable. The research question's quite good though. Does aluminium 5052 have a greater tensile strength and elongation than pure aluminium, making it better for sheet metal work and use? So she's got the context there. She's got the specific metals aluminium 5052 and aluminium, and she's got specific properties. So it is specific and relevant, so that she'll get the highest grade for her formulation of her research question. So I hope these 3 examples help you with developing your rationale, and hopefully the annotations help you see where I see the specific things that I need to mark. This is the marking criteria for the section of the assignment that we're interested in, which is the rationale and the research question. So the specific marking criteria that I'll be marking the rationale on is informed application of understanding of the properties of and structure of organic materials. This is for Year 12. Demonstrated by a considered rationale identifying clear development of the research question from the claim. Alright, so that's what I'm looking for. It's considered, as I explained. The first 2 were considered, the second one was not so considered, and they both, the first 2, were fairly clear development. They weren't perfect, but they were fairly clear. The grade below that would be a reasonable rationale that links the research question and the claim. So if you really don't have a clear development, fairly clear development, you'll end up with this one. If your rationale is vague or irrelevant, you would end up with this one. I'd also be marking a specific and relevant research question, or just relevant research questions. So if you hadn't narrowed down in your research question to specific metals or specific fibres or whatever it was, you'd only get this relevant here, and you'd end up down in this grade here. Now there's one other descriptor that is important in the rationale, and that's maybe insightful interpretation of the research evidence demonstrated by justified scientific arguments. Now, generally you need some background information in your rationale, which you draw on to make the justified scientific arguments when you're analysing your data. If you don't try and explain the trends in your data using scientific explanations, you won't have a justified scientific argument. You may have a reasonable one, but you won't have a justified one. Okay, so you need to explain the trends you see in your data using scientific arguments or scientific explanations. So usually I see some of that scientific explanation in the rationale, and then it's drawn on and repeated or summarised in the analysis. Okay, hope that helps.